Joel Bruesch. I've been with BMC for approximately 20 years in the cybersecurity area. So I've got a lot of bumps and bruises to show for my time there. And thank you for your time. So for an intro, BMC is the 7th largest software company, 10,000 customers, serving 92% of the Forbes Global 100. Kind of the takeaway for this slide is I work in a company that has a lot of people that don't like me very much. So the challenge for us, BMC very early on made the transition to cloud services. So we had a lot of the traditional capabilities you would see at most companies, rogue system detection or network admission control, or things that would generally try to make sure that services were only accessible from devices that we trusted, that we could manage the configuration on. So as that started to grow and our business started pushing for services that were internet accessible, right? All of those traditional capabilities and protections we had in place just sort of disappeared. And once people found out you could access these services, easily, obviously that spread like wildfire, and then everybody, they wanted to take the same approach. There was a lot of pressure internally from business units to make services internet accessible that were internal only. And all of these things were for very good reasons, right? It did, improve accessibility. It did get a lot of the complexity and challenges from the security space out of the way, right? So it did improve productivity. We went through iterations with BYOD. In our particular company, we allow it for mobile phones and tablets. Mobile device management solutions do a pretty good job of covering our needs there, both management and protection. On the endpoint, it's prohibited for us. And that went into a lot of legal reasons why, supporting trade secret protections, customer obligations around data. Obviously, privacy is a much more critical aspect of that. Legal hold obligations versus computer trespass laws. So we went through a lot of churn there. I think, technologies will continue to evolve. I'm sure our policies will evolve as well, but irrespective of what we wanted to see from a business perspective, users still want to do the things that make their lives easier, where they can address the risks that they're accountable for on, making sales quotas or meeting deadlines for product development. So anyway, the net of this is the industry change led to us taking a lot of risk on. We didn't really have solutions to get out in front of it at the time. Let's see, we'd been through iterations as well, doing, sort of ad hoc solutions to try to provide protections in the interim, things like whitelisting from egress IPs, but ultimately that leads to a fractured user experience, and that approach is really not sustainable in my view. I think with that, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Joel. So again, my name's Tony Kelly. I'm with Netskope. Been with Netskope for about 2.5 years. I've been in the networking and secure networking industry for 29 years. I know that's hard to believe. I look really young, but been out there for a while. I think we've lost our slide. There we go. So all of you are working through this new digital transformation that's been going on for years, right? It's everyone's moving to the cloud, whether they like it or not, right? What we've learned at Netskope, being in the industry for 6.5 years, helping enterprises understand how they're using the cloud, but more importantly, how their users are using the cloud, It's been very eye-opening. So the shadow IT is rampant, right? Folks are used to their smartphones and they want applications at the enterprise to work just as well and just as easily as the ones they can secure on their phone or their tablet or their personal device at home. And they're bringing that into the enterprise. So there's a lot of drivers for this digital transformation that are occurring. And the enablers are mobility, the smartphone. I think Steve Jobs just created a massive change in the industry for all of us. But also cloud. So innovators in the early days for Salesforce, AWS, they've really led this enormous transition in the industry that is really still just gaining speed. I mean, there's a lot going on, but much, much more to come. If you'll hit the next slide. At Netskope, we're a cloud application security broker. It's kind of the first use case of our cloud security platform. And we've done literally thousands of cloud risk assessments for enterprises. And what we've found is on average, each enterprise is actually already consuming 1,200 cloud applications. There's actually 33,000 out there today, and it continues to grow. And so the challenge is how do I get awareness of those cloud apps? How do I start to secure them, especially when 98% of the cloud consumption is driven by the users and the departments? So for an IT organization, how do they get their arms around that? And we were able to join with BMC and start to help them begin their journey of how do we secure their environment. If you go to the next slide. So the big thing is as you're now consuming all these cloud apps and starting to recognize that, the cloud apps that you're driving as an IT organization, but also all the other cloud apps that folks are either using personally or to be more productive in their current jobs, you've got to start working about identity sprawl. And how do we extend your corporate identity out to not only your sanctioned apps, the apps that you'd like your enterprise users to use, but maybe even establish that identity with all of the unsanctioned apps that they're using. Even an app like AWS, there may be a sanctioned instance of that for your corporate usage, but generally 50% of your users also have a personal version of that same app. So how do you start to establish and tie back your corporate identity to all the cloud apps that you want them using, as well as the ones that maybe you need to be aware of and start to think about how you secure that. The thing here that we've recognized is Okta is a fantastic identity provider that we love teaming with at Netskope. They can federate or extend your identity out to 4,000 to 5,000 cloud applications today. By integrating with Netskope, where we fully understand all 33,000 cloud apps, we're able to help extend that identity out to all of those apps. So kind of a big thing for all of you guys that are interested in identity.
Okay, on the strategy side, and these principles won't be dramatically different. So we kind of went on our own journey early on, but there are things you would see with like Beyond Corp, right? And fundamentally the question was, what are the capabilities that we need to put in place to facilitate the accessibility, user experience from any untrusted network, right? So as this extends out, at least we get consistency and we can maintain certain capabilities that we need still, even as things sort of move out to the cloud. So secure transport, that's a given for most applications, pretty easy. Strong authentication, certainly more than single factor, but we're looking at this with different variations that are also supported by having a device trust layer that can improve user experience as well. And then a presentation and publishing capability for internal applications. So, one thing I'd like to point out here, in our traditional VPN, we had a lot of cumbersome requirements, and we took the opportunity to sort of go back through and assess what's really required. So at BMC, as we deployed device trust, I had a lot of IT service areas knocking on the door saying, hey, we really want our software to be a requirement for access. And the more you stack in there, the higher risk you've got for impacting productivity where your employee base or your users may not be at fault. And that's that's something that you need to balance out in your own journey. The IT service areas are going to look at this and say, hey, my job gets really easy if you just make my software requirement for access to the service. The counter question there immediately should be, well, what are you doing today to monitor the health of your service and to make sure that you're going after those sort of issues? And if all you hear is crickets, if you add that in, you're facilitating lazy IT service management. I will say there are, in the last slide, there are additional requirements as well. These are just high-level principles, but certainly, make sure that you have the ability to set and define policies for both strong authentication, be it MFA or something else, and device trust that allows you to distinguish those requirements between both, at a user level and a service level, right? Because you're going to have a lot of applications that do have shared, user types, potentially customer as well as employee. So watch out for that. So scope, we've got over 100 SaaS applications. We've adopted heavy use of these, so what we're doing here impacts every part of the business, and then we've got, I think, approximately 7,000 employees, many customer accounts. Again, just make sure that when you go through this, that you account for all of the variations, across your services. And I'm aware that some of the device trust solutions, as well as some of the MFA solutions, would have global settings, policy settings, whereby you could have one application that has some sort of an issue where you can't enable that, and you'd have to disable it globally for the individual. So take care there. So our approach for device trust, standard federation, SSO, SAML2. Access control with network zone and client access rules. So when we implemented device trust, we wanted to focus primarily on the risk area, which had to do with employees using portable devices, right? So laptops, Macs, PCs. If we were to implement this for, say, our R&D labs or other areas that where you don't really have that portability risk, you've got the potential to really burden the business in ways that probably you don't intend and risk undermining your overall effort. So make sure you can, again, carve up those variations as needed, and then focus again on those high-risk segments to start. You may have global exceptions for some of these requirements, again, depending on business need and risk. I will also say that Netskope aligned very well with the requirements that we wanted in referencing some PKI-based solutions. I need to know that I've got a level of administrative control, visibility. I can still do incident response and things like that for endpoints. So I wanted to go kind of above and beyond the way that I'm seeing other approaches, profile devices. Device trust as well is buying us some flexibility to improve user experience. So again, people were able to sort of circumvent corporate policy use personal assets for work, access services. Again, even with MFA, I mean, it's not good enough, particularly with the regulatory, pressures. Again, where can, customers are always asking where can our data end up, and what are you doing to protect it, right? It comes up every time we do a sales side agreement. So we want to cover these things, but we also, the user acceptance challenge has to be addressed. And device trust affords us some flexibility to use what I would call weaker authentication methods in conjunction with it that facilitate more seamless user access to services. So this is kind of what it looks like. We bundled up a combination of Okta Mobile along with the Netskope device trust capability. And so, where our sales guys would be out trying to, use the Concur application, they'd have to punch in a password every time and log in to go, submit expenses and things of that nature. We can now provide a seamless experience to all of our applications, be them external, internet-facing, as well as internal. Again, a unified, seamless experience. And so, Touch ID, and we can cover this in a later time, but I'm gonna jump to it here. Touch ID and Face ID are essentially local authentication, right, to a phone that is a wrapper for a credential manager, right? It just stores a username and a password, right? But the authentication's, pretty secure. But if you use it for seamless access, then you're leaving your internet-facing services exposed to single-factor credential compromise. Not great. With device trust, now we're able to leverage that local authentication to facilitate access to services in a way that if somebody gets my username and password, they still can't log into anything. And so this is really ideal, and this doesn't differ, really beyond what you would see if you just did Okta Mobile, but it also addresses some risks associated with, again, Touch ID and Face ID. So now it's, launch of Okta Mobile, point your phone at your face, use your fingerprint, and boom, you can, access and jump between all of your federated applications, be it external or internal.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about the implementation for Netskope at BMC. So BMC, just like any other organization, is adopting cloud app more and more faster, and it's for good reason. They help our employees to get their job done more quickly, easily, flexibly, and compared to any traditional software. So whether it's section or shadow, cloud app usage is growing, and we need to monitor and enforce our security policy consistently across all of the cloud apps in our environment, as well as on-premise app that we allow internet access for our employees. So on the top of that, we also need to report on their compliance. And we need to do these things while enabling our user to move fast with the cloud. So with the combination of Netskope Active Platform and Okta Single Sign-On, as well as MFA, Adaptive MFA, BMC can achieve both goals. So as you can see, Okta SSO and Adaptive MFA will provide us the authentication and sign-on capabilities. Network Zone allow the integration with Netskope Active Platform device classification to perform the device check, either mobile, laptop, desktop, that our employees use to access BMC apps and services, either cloud or external on-premise apps, whether they are in BMC office or on the road to enforce BMC managed device policies. So to implement the Netskope Active Platform. Netskope Active Platform has a Netskope client. It's a lightweight agent that needs to be deployed at endpoint to all our BMC devices. So with BMC Client Management, that's one of the products that we have at BMC. It's our larger headless service management solution. We're able to deploy Netskope client to all BMC Windows devices seamlessly. BMC policy compliance component is also used to enforce Netskope client at the endpoints. For all mobile devices, we implement Netskope integration with AirWatch. That's BMC used for MDM solution. So Netskope can deploy on-demand VPN profile, can be configured and deployed to these mobiles. We also take advantage of Casper GMF Pro solution to deploy Netskope client for Mac devices. So once it's deployed, Netskope client at the endpoints will communicate with Netskope platform on the cloud for device classification check based on blocks, alert, inline policy that's set up for specific apps that we configure in BMC steering configuration. And I should emphasize that when you implement Netskope Active Platform, you want to make sure that you have your own specific steering configuration so that you can move slowly one app at a time for a particular user and group, and then growing from there to make sure that we don't interfere with the business transaction. Netskope client can also be upgraded automatically when you enable that option in Netskope Admin Console. Netskope also provides you a way that they call it Netskope Checker, so you can allow employee to install the Netskope client as a self-service through Okta integration.
Right, maybe go back one slide. I'd love to just talk to a little bit about the architecture here. Quick question, how many of you have heard of Netskope before? I know one person has. Okay, great. One of the things that we look at in terms of, as I'm doing this digital transition to the cloud, I need a new architecture for securing the cloud. One of the first most important elements is a single sign-on identity provider. So Okta did that with BMC several years back. Really the next step though is how do I now have a platform for enforcing policy? And so that's where Netskope comes in. We are a cloud security platform. CASB is kind of the first use case for us. But the initial use case at BMC was really very interesting because instead of just simply understanding what cloud apps are we using, how can we also use your cloud platform to help us understand the posture of our devices? Because we want to know that the user is a valid user, but we also want to know that their device is trusted. And trusted meant we were going to check for, did they have BMC's correct version of McAfee AV running? Was that device in the BMC domain, joined in that domain? Did it have a BMC certificate? And a few other steps that we would check on. And as we did that, we established that this device is managed. If it's not managed, then they don't get access to the sanctioned cloud apps that BMC has to offer for them. So it's a really interesting solution. We are seeing more and more of our customers being very thoughtful of the devices accessing their cloud resources, especially their data that's in the cloud. Because if it gets pulled down to a personal device, you now no longer have any visibility where that went. So BMC recognized by having device classification, they could really ensure this is a issued device from BMC. It's got all the right credentials on it to make sure that we're going to be secure and be able to give them that access moving forward. To me, one of the really interesting things that we can do to establish device classification, if you're concerned about it, is does the local device have disk encryption? And is it enabled? So we can check for that too as a part of that device classification. Any of those criteria, you can use just one of those to establish this is a trusted device, or you may have all of those. It's got to have every one of those categories, and only then will I say that device is trusted and managed and will allow them access. But kind of a really interesting use case, but in general for securing your cloud, we absolutely think you need that identity provider, and Okta is one of our favorites. They're a cloud-based offering, just like Netskope is, and then that cloud security platform with a company like Netskope.
Again, kind of in summary, make sure, at BMC I encountered a lot of resistance. There were, again, people were, they were doing things that were driven, at its core by friction that had been introduced by just sort of old legacy IT practices and security practices. Anyone that is going down this journey, I would challenge you to not fall back. These control points are strong enough to take us back to that era. And I would say, certainly balance things out with the potential business impact, or whatever you're going to do to load these up to profile, and get out in front of leadership within the business, and make sure that they understand. And if you can, try to provide some benefit, seamless access, something along those lines, so it's not just going to be pain and suffering, because they come from a scary place. They used to have to VPN in all the time. It was slow. It took forever. Just a lot of hoops to jump through to do their job. So if you can get, certainly get beyond that, there's I think a happy medium where the business benefits and we can sort of rein in some of that risk again. Certainly keeping the right support personnel engaged early on in the project, so they're aware, they understand how to handle everything. I will say one of the big benefits here for with Netskope is we were able to do a deployment, understand kind of the profile, how many assets would be out of compliance and things like that before we did any sort of policy enforcement. And so it allowed us to get in front of some of the posturing within, again, areas that didn't necessarily want this deployed. We were able to go in and say we're going to do a deployment and we can expect no issues. We've already run those down over the last couple of weeks. On the communication sides, the FAQs, make sure the employee population knows what's coming. The whys, certainly get into legal aspects, policy, portions, and again, emphasize the benefits to them and their productivity and just, again, seamless access. I already covered number 4. And then as you go through the deployment, prioritize, lesser used applications and work your way up to the broader deployments. Again, that will do a good job of undermining any pushback. It's hard to say the sky is falling when you're starting with an application that's only got 100 users or something like that. And the profiling is all the same. So as you go across each individual service, you're working through any potential issues, and by the time you get to the big ones, it's push a button and nothing's going to happen. So I think that.
Yeah, I would say just maybe one last takeaway for me is that you want to recognize that your folks are consuming the cloud, and then have a good strategy with how you want to handle that. On that policy side, how restrictive do you want to be? How open do you want to be? But at the end of the day, the goal is how do you enable those users to consume the applications that they want to do their jobs effectively in a productive way and have a great end user experience while still falling within the policies that you have as a company. And I think some of these newer solutions, Okta and Netskope in this case, help you do that and do it in a way where it's not very intrusive to the end user. So that, I think, has been a big part of allowing the users to not rebel at the end of the day. So, any questions we want to take at this point? And So are you all using Okta today, I'm sure, federating apps? Anybody out there federating more than 100 apps in their enterprise? Not with Okta, someone else? Okay. Any of you out there using a CASB or even better yet, Netskope? You got Netskope, okay, good. All right, well, appreciate the time, but if you guys have any other questions and just want to chat at the end of the session, we'll be here for at least another 15, 20 minutes.
Thank you, everyone.